My sister's voice was shaking, but her words were steady. We all think you stole from Mom, Daniel. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I read everyone. My name is Daniel Ross. I'm 38 years old, and I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. These days, I live in a quiet suburb just outside of Cincinnati, work as a senior project manager for a national engineering firm, and make more money than I ever thought I would. But it didn't come easy. I spent over a decade clawing my way up, taking the jobs nobody else wanted, showing up early and leaving late, driving hundreds of miles for client meetings, working through weekends while friends were out at bars or family was watching football. I grew up in a modest two-bedroom bungalow in German Village, the red brick streets and historic houses lining our block, with my mom working as a secretary at a small law office, and my dad leaving when I was 9, which left her raising my younger sister, Emily, and me on her own. Money was always tight, but my mom did her best. And when I graduated high school, I didn't have the luxury of college right away. I went to work, picking up shifts at a warehouse and doing night classes at Columbus State, before finally transferring to Ohio State to get my degree in civil engineering. Every step felt like a fight uphill. By the time I was in my late 20s, I'd finally broken into a solid job at a mid-sized engineering firm in Cleveland, then later got recruited down to Cincinnati for a senior role. My salary went from barely scraping $40,000 a year to comfortably into six figures, and I used that to not just improve my own life, but to help my family. When Mom's roof started leaking, I paid for the full replacement. When Emily lost her job and was on the brink of eviction, I covered 3 months' rent. When Mom needed surgery and her insurance didn't cover all the costs, I wrote a check for the remainder without hesitation. I didn't keep tabs or ask for repayment. Family was family, and I believed loyalty and generosity were the backbone of it. But somewhere in the last year, something shifted, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. My calls to Mom went unanswered more often. Texts would get one-word replies. Emily started posting family dinner pictures on Facebook that I hadn't been invited to, tagging cousins I barely saw anymore. I chalked it up to busyness or maybe small misunderstandings, but there were moments that gnawed at me. A neighbor back in German Village, Mrs. Henderson, ran into me at the Kroger on High Street one Saturday and said, "I heard about what happened at your mom's." "I'm so sorry, dear." I asked her what she meant, but she just patted my arm and said, "You hang in there." At work, my colleague Jordan, a guy I've known for years and trust, pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "Everything okay with the family stuff?" I asked him what he was talking about, and he just said, "I heard some things, man. Just wanted to check on you." These were little moments, but they were stacking up, like a puzzle forming in the dark where you can only see pieces in your hand, not the picture they make together. The turning point came at a Sunday dinner at Mom's, one I had been invited to surprisingly, though it was last minute and felt almost obligatory. I drove down I-71 from Cincinnati, the familiar route I'd taken hundreds of times before, skyline chili billboards dotting the roadside, the flat Ohio farmland stretching in all directions. When I walked into the house, the air felt heavy, like the conversation had just shifted before I opened the door. Emily was in the kitchen with Mom, hushed tones between them, and my cousin Dave was in the living room scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up. Dinner was polite but stilted, everyone talking around me instead of with me, and I noticed the way Emily kept bringing up trust in vague, unrelated ways, like telling a story about a coworker who lied about something small, then glancing at me. I left that night with an uneasy pit in my stomach. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood held a block party in German Village, the kind where folding tables line the sidewalks and kids run between yards while the adults drink cheap beer and gossip. I hadn't planned to go, but Mom had sent me a short text, "You coming?" So I figured I should make the effort. When I got there, people greeted me warmly enough, but there was a weird, almost pitying tone in some of their voices. Then it happened. Mom's oldest friend, Mrs. Dalton, a woman who had practically helped raise me, came up, took my hand and said, "I'm so sorry to hear about the money." I froze, the background noise of the party fading out in my ears. "What money?" I asked. She gave me a small, almost confused smile. "The $18,000 from your mom's account. I heard you took it to cover some debts. That's what Emily told me anyway." My chest felt tight, my mouth dry. In that moment, the puzzle pieces snapped into place in the worst possible way. The whispers, the sidelong glances, the tension, my own family had been telling people I stole from my mother. Not only was it a complete fabrication, but it was the kind of accusation that strikes at the core of a person's character, especially in a tight-knit community like ours, where reputation travels faster than any fact-checking ever could. I kept my voice even and said, "Who else did she tell?" Mrs. Dalton hesitated, then said, "Oh, I don't know. I think most folks here have heard something. Your cousin mentioned it to my husband." I thanked her for telling me and excused myself, the weight of humiliation settling deep in my bones. I didn't go find Emily. I didn't confront Mom. I just left, driving back to Cincinnati in silence, the summer evening air pressing heavy through the open windows. That night, I sat in my living room and replayed the last year in my head. Every act of kindness I'd shown them, every bill I'd covered, every time I'd put my own needs second. I thought about how easily they'd taken that generosity and twisted it into something vile. And beneath the hurt, beneath the disbelief, there was something colder starting to form. Not rage, not a desire to scream or slam doors, but a measured, deliberate awareness that this was no misunderstanding. This was orchestrated. And if they wanted to drag my name through the dirt, they'd underestimated just how much I could bury them in the truth. The thing about reputations in places like German Village is that once a story takes root, it doesn't just spread. It grows legs, gets a life of its own, and starts walking into rooms you haven't even entered yet, whispering on your behalf in voices you can't control. I didn't call Emily after that block party, and I didn't text Mom either. I went quiet, and in that quiet I could almost hear them filling in the gaps, telling their version to anyone who would listen, knowing I wasn't there to counter it. Over the next 2 weeks, little signs of the rumor's reach kept finding me. At work, in the middle of reviewing a proposal with one of our junior engineers, my phone buzzed with a text from an old high school friend I hadn't heard from in years. "Hey man, I don't believe what I'm hearing. You good?" At first, I didn't respond, but then the messages started piling up from other people. A cousin in Dayton, a former coworker in Cleveland, even the guy who used to mow Mom's lawn when I was in college, all of them in some variation of, "I heard about the thing with your mom, I'm sure it's not true." The phrasing was always the same, as if everyone was reading from the same script, which told me exactly where it originated. Emily. Always Emily. I could picture her on the phone, leaning against the counter in Mom's kitchen, voice low and heavy with false concern, saying she didn't want to gossip, but that she thought people deserved to know the truth. I didn't confront her because I understood something they didn't, that the more you protest against a lie in small, scattered conversations, the more you legitimize it in people's minds. You have to let it build until the weight of the lie collapses under its own size. But that didn't make it easy. Every time I drove through my neighborhood in Cincinnati, every time I stopped for coffee at the same Dunkin' on Montgomery Road, I wondered if the cashier had seen something on Facebook, if the guy waiting for his latte was giving me a second glance because he recognized my name. My boss, Tom, a man I respected and trusted, called me into his office one afternoon under the pretense of talking about a bid proposal. But halfway through, he leaned back and said, "Look, I'm going to say this once. Someone from your hometown emailed me, said some things about you and your family. I deleted it. But I want you to know that kind of crap can linger if you're not careful." He didn't ask for details, didn't press, but the fact that it had reached my professional world, that was the line. They weren't just playing in the realm of family squabbles anymore. They were taking shots at my livelihood. That night, I pulled out an old banker's box from my closet, the one where I'd kept every important document related to Mom's finances over the years. Copies of checks I'd written, medical bills I'd covered, even the notarized letter she'd signed when I helped her refinance the house to lower her interest rate. I laid them out on my dining table like a timeline, each one a physical reminder of the truth they were trying to erase. And then I made a decision. I would not go to them for answers. I would go to the source, the bank. The next morning, I took a personal day from work, put on a plain button-down shirt and slacks, and drove back to Columbus. Mom's bank was still the same small branch off Parsons Avenue, the one with the aging carpet and the smell of paper and toner hanging in the air. I walked in and was greeted by Sarah, the branch manager, who I'd known since I was a teenager opening my first savings account. Her face lit up when she saw me, but when I told her I needed to talk about a withdrawal from my mother's account, her smile faded just enough for me to notice. In her office, door closed, I laid it out. "There's a rumor going around that I took $18,000 from my mom's account. I need to see the record of that withdrawal." She hesitated, probably weighing the ethics and privacy concerns, but then she nodded and pulled it up on her computer. The withdrawal had been made 3 months ago, in person, at that very branch. The slip was signed, not in my handwriting, but in Emily's. I asked if they had security footage from that day, and she said they did, though it was archived. 10 minutes later, I was staring at a grainy but unmistakable video of Emily walking into the bank, smiling at the teller, and walking out with a thick white envelope. No disguise, no hesitation, just bold as daylight. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm when I asked for a copy of the footage and the transaction record. Sarah hesitated again, but after I explained the situation, not in dramatic detail, just enough to make it clear I was the wrong party, she agreed, printing the statement and burning the footage onto a DVD. As I tucked the envelope into my briefcase, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was thin, almost rehearsed. "Danny, honey, I heard you were asking questions about the bank. Please don't make a big deal out of this. Fun comes first." I replayed it twice, not because I needed to hear the words again, but because the tone said everything. She knew, and she was choosing to protect Emily, not me. I drove back to Cincinnati in silence, the weight of the evidence sitting in my passenger seat like a loaded weapon I wasn't ready to fire. Over the next week, I gathered more. Screenshots of Facebook posts where Emily hinted at betrayal in the family without naming names. Text threads from mutual relatives where she all but spelled out her accusation. And even an email forwarded to me anonymously from someone in our neighborhood association. Emily had written to them directly, saying I was unstable and couldn't be trusted with other people's property. Every piece was dated, sourced, and undeniable, and still, I said nothing, because I had a plan. I knew that confronting them in private would only give them room to twist the narrative again, to cry and claim misunderstandings, to make it my word against theirs. No, this needed to happen where there were no shadows to hide in, no walls to contain the truth. Which is why I waited until I got an invitation to the Ross family barbecue. It was an annual tradition at my Uncle Mark's house on the edge of the neighborhood. The one event of the year that brought together not just the extended family, but half the people from German Village, and even some of my colleagues from work had shown up in the past. Emily and Mom would be there, of course. They never missed it, and so would every person who had ever heard their version of the story. I RSVP'd with a short "looking forward to it" and spent the weeks leading up to it refining my plan. I called Sarah from the bank and asked if she'd be willing to stop by to clear up a misunderstanding. I invited my boss, Tom, under the pretense of introducing him to some of my family, knowing he'd have my back. And I made sure to personally invite Mrs. Dalton and Mrs. Henderson, the two neighbors who had repeated Emily's lie to me directly. I didn't tell any of them what was coming. The night before the barbecue, I laid out the evidence on my coffee table one last time. The bank statement, the signed withdrawal slip, the DVD of the footage, the screenshots, the email, and Mom's voicemail. I slid each piece into a clear plastic sleeve and arranged them in a neat stack inside a black leather portfolio. When I zipped it shut, it felt like locking a door behind me. There would be no turning back. And for the first time in months, I slept without waking in the middle of the night. When I opened my eyes the next morning, there was this quiet in my house, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels settled. Like every piece of the plan was in its place, and all that was left was to walk through it. Before we get into what happened that day, let me just say this. There's a reason I didn't blow up earlier. A lot of people would have gone straight to Facebook, or called everyone who believed the lie, or even confronted Emily in the moment. But the thing about playing the long game, you only get one shot to pull the trigger. And when you do, it has to be in front of the right audience. So when I say I was ready, I mean I had been rehearsing this day in my head for weeks. Every word, every step, every glance. I woke up early, ironed a clean navy button-down, and took my time getting dressed. Not overdressed, just sharp enough to look confident, collected. I loaded the black leather portfolio into my passenger seat like it was a passenger itself. And then I drove to my uncle's place in German Village, taking the long route through the streets I grew up on. The brick roads, the old houses with their sagging porches, and the people who had been whispering about me for months. When I turned onto my uncle's street, I could already see the setup. Folding tables draped in red and white checkered cloths, the grill smoking, kids darting between yards. A crowd had already formed in little clusters. And here's the thing about these barbecues. They're not just about burgers and potato salad. They're about politics. Neighborhood politics, family politics. Who's talking to who who's not, whose face lights up when you arrive, and whose doesn't. I spotted Emily almost immediately. She was standing near the drinks table, plastic cup in hand, holding court with a small group, 2 cousins, 1 neighbor, and my mom. She didn't see me yet, and I could read her body language like a headline. Laughing too loudly, leaning in just enough to make it look like she was sharing something juicy. And here's the thing, I didn't walk straight over. Not yet. I started with the people who'd been neutral, or maybe even skeptical about the rumors. A handshake here, a friendly good to see you there. I made sure my voice carried just enough that they could hear the steadiness in it. No bitterness, no defensiveness, just calm. But I was clocking everything, every glance, every whisper. 15 minutes in, I saw Sarah from the bank arrive. She gave me a polite nod from across the yard, the kind that says, "I'm here, and I remember why." My boss, Tom, showed up shortly after, taller than most people here, standing out in his crisp polo and that subtle look of curiosity he gets when he's about to see something unfold. And then there were the neighbors, Mrs. Dalton and Mrs. Henderson, arriving within minutes of each other. I greeted them warmly, because here's a little secret. When you're about to dismantle a lie, you want the people who spread it to feel comfortable. That way, the shock hits harder. By the time my uncle announced that food was ready, most of the yard had filled in. I sat at one of the picnic tables near the center, a spot where I could see everything and where everyone could see me. Emily still hadn't approached. Neither had Mom, but I could feel their eyes on me, flicking over whenever they thought I wasn't looking. Halfway through my burger, my uncle, bless him, called for everyone's attention. He likes to make little speeches at these things. Usually it's just jokes about family and a toast to another good year in the neighborhood. But this time I saw an opening. When he was done, I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke in that steady project manager tone I use in big meetings at work. Hey everyone, before we all get too far into the potato salad, I want to clear up something that's been hanging over me for the last few months. Instant silence. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. I've been told, I continued, that there's a rumor going around about me. Specifically, that I took $18,000 from my mom's account. I didn't look at Emily yet, not directly. I let my eyes scan the crowd, pausing briefly on a few people who I knew had heard it or repeated it. I don't usually address gossip, but this one? It's too big to let slide, so I thought, why not address it here, where most of the people who've heard it are standing in the same place? A ripple of awkward shifting went through the crowd. I brought some things with me, I said, and placed the black leather portfolio on the table in front of me. I unzipped it slowly, deliberately. Because if we're going to talk about this, we might as well talk about it with the facts right here. I could feel Emily stiffen across the yard. Mom's face had gone pale. I pulled the first plastic sleeve from the portfolio and held it up so the sunlight caught it. This, I said, is a copy of the withdrawal slip from my mom's account. $18,000. 3 months ago, not in my handwriting. I let that hang in the air for a beat before sliding it onto the table. This, I continued, pulling out the second sleeve, is the security footage from the bank on that exact day, at that exact time. I glanced over at Sarah from the bank. She gave a small, firm nod. I held up the still image I'd printed from the footage. Clear enough for anyone who'd ever seen Emily to recognize her. And here's where I made a choice. I didn't look angry. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it all calm, measured, professional. Because nothing rattles a liar more than when you dismantle them without breaking a sweat. This, I said, laying the image down beside the withdrawal slip, is my sister Emily leaving the bank with an envelope. The same envelope that contained the money. There was a low murmur now. Not loud, but sharp, the kind that cuts through a crowd when the air shifts. I reached for the next sleeve. These are Facebook posts Emily made, hinting at betrayal in the family. These are text messages she sent to relatives, spelling out her accusation. And this, I slid out the printed email, is an email she sent to my professional world, telling people I was unstable and untrustworthy, which, by the way, is defamation. That last word hit like a hammer. Finally, I picked up my phone, hit play, and held it up to a small portable speaker I'd brought. Mom's voice filled the air. Danny, honey, I heard you were asking questions about the bank. Please don't make a big deal out of this. Family comes first. I stopped it there. And then I looked at them, first at Emily, then at Mom. You wanted this to be the story, I said quietly, that I stole from my own mother. You wanted it to be whispered over fences and passed around at block parties. You wanted people to look at me and see a thief. So I thought, why not let everyone hear the real story all at once with proof they can hold in their hands? No one spoke. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the back. I've covered your rent, Emily. Paid for Mom's roof. Covered medical bills. I never asked for a dime back. And this, I tapped the plastic sleeve with the bank slip, is how you repaid me. Emily's face was red now, her lips pressed into a tight line. Mom looked like she'd aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. I straightened up. So here's what's going to happen. I won't be speaking to either of you again. Not privately, not publicly. You've lost the right to be in my life. And as for the money, I turned to Sarah. I'll be filing a police report for theft today. That drew a sharp inhale from a few people. Filing charges against family isn't done in neighborhoods like ours, which is exactly why I was doing it. And just so we're clear, I added, scanning the crowd, if I hear one more word, about me being a thief, I will have my lawyers send a defamation notice so fast your heads will spin. Every screenshot, every recording, every printed copy is backed up in multiple places. This story doesn't get to grow legs again. Then I zipped the portfolio shut, picked it up, and walked away from the table. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of people avoiding eye contact with Emily and Mom, whispering behind their hands, some outright walking away from them. Sarah from the bank shook my hand on her way out. Tom clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You handled that like a pro." By the time I got to my car, my phone had already blown up with texts. Some from family members apologizing, some from people saying they always knew something was off about Emily, and one from an unknown number that just said, "You didn't have to do that." I deleted it without replying. A week later, the theft report was filed. 2 weeks after that, Emily's mugshot appeared on the Franklin County Public Records site. A petty theft charge, but one that would follow her every time she applied for a job, rented an apartment, or tried to play the role of the responsible one in any circle. Mom tried calling. I didn't answer. She tried sending a letter. I sent it back unopened. She made her choice when she protected Emily over me. And as for me, my life went on. My job was untouched. My reputation in the places that mattered was stronger than ever. Because the truth doesn't just clear your name. If you play it right, it cements it. Every so often when I drive through German Village, I see them. Emily avoiding eye contact. Mom looking down at her shoes. And I don't feel pity or guilt or even anger. I feel free. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting the truth from the rooftops. It's putting it on the record in a way no one can erase, and then walking away so they can live in the world they created for themselves. Cold, clean, final. If you enjoyed this story, please give a thumbs up to the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful true life stories.